Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the science, the psychology, and the sneaky behavioral design behind why we literally cannot put our phones down. We live in an era where our devices are basically biological appendages, right? So let's break down exactly how these tools have hijacked our neurobiology and, much more importantly, how we can take our minds back.
Okay, so picture this. Digital marketing expert Chanel Acevedo shared a wildly relatable scenario. She describes picking up her phone to check just one single text message, and somehow 45 minutes later, she's deep into Instagram Reels watching a total stranger organize a pantry for the third time. She didn't plan to do it, she didn't even enjoy most of it, but there she was. I mean, we've all been there, right? This perfectly highlights how a quick, innocent glance at our device so often morphs into an unintended, massive deep dive.
Now, right off the bat, we've got to validate this struggle. Acevedo, who, by the way, spent 14 years building engagement campaigns for major brands, reminds us that this is absolutely not a personal failing. It's not a lack of willpower on your part. You are up against some of the smartest engineers and psychologists in the entire world. They have intentionally designed these platforms using brilliant attention engineering to make them almost irresistible.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be looking at the epidemic, the hook model, the brain on notifications, the hidden cognitive costs, and finally, strategies to reclaim control.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the smartphone epidemic. Get this, Americans check their devices an estimated 205 times a day. 205. Just think about that number for a second. When you're doing something 205 times a day, checking your phone is no longer a conscious, deliberate choice. It has become a completely automatized tick. It's a reflex that straddles that blurry line between habit formation and full-on compulsion. And what's really crazy is the profound disconnect in our behavior. A Gallup poll showed that 58% of Americans actually believe they use their phones way too much, and that number jumps to nearly 80% for people under 30. So we know there's a problem. Yet a totally separate survey found that 8% of people felt they couldn't last a single hour. Not even 1 hour without their device. We are deeply uncomfortable with our usage, yet entirely dependent on it.
So, how in the world did we get here? That brings us to Section 2, the hook model.
These 4 steps basically outline the entire anatomy of a habit. It always starts with a trigger, maybe a notification pinging, or even just an internal feeling of boredom. Next is the action, which tech companies make as effortless as possible, like a simple, frictionless swipe. Then comes the variable reward. This is the classic slot machine effect. You never know if you'll see a boring ad or the funniest video you've ever seen, and that unpredictability is exactly what keeps you hooked. Finally, the investment phase asks you to put in a tiny bit of effort, like leaving a comment or following an account. And guess what? That loads the next trigger and starts the whole cycle all over again.
So how does this translate into our daily routines? As we can see from Nir Eyal's framework here, an action enters what's called the habit zone, that shaded area, and becomes an automatic response based on 2 key factors, frequency and perceived utility. Even if an action doesn't have a massive perceived benefit, if you do it frequently enough, like, say, checking a smartphone 205 times a day, it easily crosses that threshold and becomes a deeply ingrained habit.
Moving right along to Section 3, your brain on notifications.
Have you ever felt your phone buzz in your pocket, only to pull it out and realize absolutely nothing is there? Yeah, me too. This is actually called phantom vibration syndrome. Our brains become so hyper-attuned to the specific frequencies of our digital alerts that our sensory cortex goes into a state of constant, exhausting readiness. We literally start misinterpreting simple muscle twitches or the friction of our clothing as phone alerts. That is just how deeply this technology has hacked our internal monitoring systems.
And this constant hypervigilance, it is driven by a seriously powerful chemical cocktail in our heads. Dopamine isn't just about pleasure, guys. It actually drives the frantic anticipation and seeking of a reward. It peaks before you even open the message. On the flip side, cortisol, the stress hormone, dictates our reaction to the absence of checking our phones. It spikes when we see a massive backlog of unread notifications, creating this low-level, chronic state of stress. It's the anxiety of the unread.
Which leads us directly into Section 4, the hidden cognitive costs.
There was this massive, totally eye-opening study from UT Austin that tested nearly 800 smartphone users to measure their cognitive capacity based entirely on where their phone was located. The results were wild. Even if your phone is turned completely off and face down, if it is just sitting on your desk, your cognitive capacity is at its lowest. It improves slightly if the phone is hidden in your bag, but participants scored the highest only when their phones were in an entirely different room. Simply having the device in your visual field causes a literal brain drain because part of your subconscious mind is actively burning energy just to not pick it up.
And those costs just compound throughout the day. Every single time you switch your attention from a deep focused task over to a notification, you incur a switching cost. This leaves behind something researchers call attention residue. A portion of your cognitive resources actually stays tethered to that interruption, which weakens the neural pathways associated with deep work. It leads to full-blown cognitive erosion. We are literally fragmenting our attention into tiny little pieces.
All right, let's fix this. Section 5, Strategies to Reclaim Control. We're going to start with friction strategies. Since our habits are so automatic, we literally have to interrupt our own muscle memory. You can move distracting apps off your home screen and bury them in folders. Even better, delete the app entirely and force yourself to use the clunky mobile web browser version. Or try enabling grayscale mode on your phone to strip away all those vibrant dopamine-triggering colors. By adding just a tiny bit of friction, you give your conscious brain a split second to catch up and ask, wait a minute, do I actually want to be doing this right now?
Next up, we need to set some hard boundaries and actually retrain your algorithm. Honestly, check in with yourself. How does scrolling make you feel? If it's making you anxious or angry, aggressively use that not interested button to retrain the algorithm to show you calmer, more inspiring content. You also need physical boundaries. Try going screen-free for the very first hour of the day to avoid starting your morning in a reactive panic. And at 9 p.m., put your devices in another room to protect your sleep from blue light and cortisol spikes.
Look, ultimately, the goal here is not absolute perfection. You don't need to throw your smartphone into the ocean and go live in a cabin in the woods. It is simply about transitioning from mindless scrolling, where you are just coasting on reactive autopilot, to intentional usage, where you're making a conscious, deliberate choice to use the tool for a specific purpose. If you can reduce your doom scrolling from 2 hours a day down to just 30 minutes, that is a massive victory for your mental health.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought today. Look at the device sitting next to you right now, or maybe the one you're holding in your hand, and ask yourself, are you controlling your phone, or is your phone controlling you? You absolutely have the power to reclaim your cognitive autonomy. Try putting just one of these friction strategies into practice today and see how quickly your brain breathes a massive sigh of relief.